In late April 2021, a Bengal tiger was found living inside an abandoned house in a residential neighborhood of northwest Houston, Texas, after a neighbor noticed the animal through a window. The tiger was in adequate health. No registration existed for it with any municipal, state, or federal authority. No permit had been filed. The question of how long it had been living there, inside one of the most densely observed residential environments in the United States, was never definitively resolved. That is the documented case. The question being asked about a very different stretch of American geography is whether any cases have not been documented at all. Panthera tigris, the tiger, has no evolutionary or ecological history in North America. The species evolved across the southern tier of Asia, from the Caspian coastline to Russia's Far East and the island of Sumatra, where an estimated 4,000 wild individuals survive according to the most recent assessments. The species has been classified as endangered by the International Union for Conservation of Nature since 1986. There are no wild tigers in North America. There is no established population in the United States. There is no management protocol for tiger in the state of Montana, because there is, officially, nothing to manage. These are the accepted facts. What exists alongside them is a problem of accounting that the official record has not fully addressed. At the time of the passage of the Big Cat Public Safety Act in December 2022, federal estimates placed the number of captive tigers in private facilities across the United States at between 5,000 and 10,000 individuals, a figure that exceeded the total documented wild global population by a factor of more than 2. The majority of those animals were held in facilities operating outside mandatory registration requirements. No central registry documented their numbers. When they died, escaped, or were transferred to informal arrangements, the event produced no federal record. The Big Cat Public Safety Act mandated registration going forward. It did not retroactively account for the animals that had spent decades in administrative darkness. Those animals, their numbers unverified, their locations unknown, remained, in the regulatory sense, invisible. The question is not whether tigers can survive in places they are not expected to be. The question is which of those places has been examined, and which has not. Montana occupies approximately 380,000 square kilometers of the northern Rocky Mountain interior. The Bob Marshall Wilderness Complex encompasses approximately 1.5 million roadless acres along the Rocky Mountain front, an area approaching the total land area of Delaware, with no permanent road access to its interior. Adjacent wilderness units add to a continuous corridor of terrain accessible only on foot: the Cabinet Mountains Wilderness, the Selway Bitterroot Wilderness, the Mission Mountains Wilderness area, each compounding the detection deficit across a common drainage system that no trail network fully penetrates. Camera trap deployment across these regions, the primary tool for large carnivore monitoring, is documented at densities that leave the interior drainage corridors, the upper watershed sections, and the dense riparian stands between established trails without systematic photographic coverage in any given survey year. The wilderness here does not simply limit survey capacity. It actively degrades the evidence that surveys require. Precipitation across the northwestern Montana watershed is sufficient, under typical conditions, to dissolve track impressions, disperse scat deposits, and redistribute kill site material within 24 to 48 hours of deposition. A large animal can move through this terrain, feed, rest, and depart without leaving any recoverable sign within the detection window that current field methods can capture. The substrate cooperates with absence. The Amur tiger, Panthera tigris altaica, the subspecies native to Russia's Sikhote-Alin range in the Russian Far East, is the subspecies whose ecology most precisely corresponds to what northwestern Montana offers. It is the largest felid on Earth by average body mass. It evolved in environments where winter temperatures fall below -25 to -30 degrees Celsius for extended periods, and where accumulated snowpack exceeds 1 meter. Montana's northern and northwestern interior reaches comparable minimum temperatures in hard winters. The prey base the Amur tiger evolved to exploit ungulates in the 400 to 700 kilogram range, principally red deer and Manchurian wapiti in native habitat, finds its functional parallel in Montana's Rocky Mountain elk, whose statewide population is currently estimated at approximately 160,000 individuals. White-tailed deer and mule deer add a further prey resource, more distributed and available across lower elevation terrain throughout the year. For a tiger of the Amur profile introduced to northwestern Montana, this is not biologically alien territory. It is a recognizable one. The behavioral ecology of Panthera tigris altaica further constrains the detection probability. Amur tigers are strictly solitary and maintain exclusive territories of up to 1,000 square kilometers in native range, a spatial requirement that distributes individuals so widely that a given camera station may record a resident animal only rarely even within confirmed occupied habitat. The species is crepuscular in its primary movement pattern, active in the 2 hours bracketing dawn and dusk, and avoids open ground when cover alternatives exist. It selects riparian corridors, steep drainage channels, and dense second-growth conifer as primary movement routes, precisely the terrain type that defines the interior drainage systems of the Bob Marshall and the Cabinet Mountains. This is not an animal that survives by evading detection. It is an animal whose entire behavioral architecture assumes detection is a condition to be permanently avoided. Reports of large striped felids have been submitted to Montana wildlife authorities across multiple counties in the northwestern part of the state over a span of at least 2 decades. Among the observers who have submitted such accounts, several have held professional qualifications in livestock management and predator identification, with documented familiarity with the region's confirmed large predator complement, mountain lion, grizzly bear, wolf, black bear, and documented prior experience distinguishing unfamiliar predation sign from known species. The physical descriptors that appear with consistency across separate accounts: body mass substantially exceeding puma concolor, distinct vertical flank striping, a tail carriage lower and more horizontal than the mountain lion's characteristic elevated curve, are not the typical product of misidentification in observers with that level of professional field background. The question is not whether these accounts are credible on their own terms. The question is whether credibility alone, in the absence of physical evidence that the terrain systematically destroys, constitutes what the current framework would accept as evidence of presence. Each account, taken individually, resolves nothing. Taken together, across the geography and the span of time they represent, they describe a pattern that does not resolve neatly into the category of error. Not enough to confirm. Not enough to dismiss. If you've made it this far, subscribe. This channel covers the cases science hasn't formally closed. The institutional response to these accounts has been categorical reassignment, most commonly to misidentified mountain lion, which reflects not institutional dishonesty but institutional architecture. Montana Fish, Wildlife and Parks operates within a classification framework built for the fauna the state is documented to contain. A report inconsistent with that fauna does not generate a new investigative category. It is absorbed into the nearest available one. The possibility that the reassignment is inaccurate, that a confirmed category is being applied to an unconfirmed animal, is not a hypothesis the framework is structured to produce. The answer to whether that matters is not theoretical. History has already provided a template. In 1979, the United States Fish and Wildlife Service formally declared the black-footed ferret, Mustela nigripes, extinct, on the basis of surveys that had been conducted in good faith and that met the available methodological standard. In 1981, a surviving colony was discovered on a private ranch near Meteets, Wyoming, fewer than 100 kilometers from the Montana border, when a ranch dog retrieved a specimen that no survey had ever recorded. The surveys had not failed methodologically. They had failed geographically. In December 1938, a coelacanth, Latimeria chalumnae, was recovered from a fishing catch off the coast of South Africa, approximately 65 million years after the geological record had indicated the lineage was gone. In 1975, the Chacoan peccary, Catagonus wagneri, was confirmed as a living species in the Gran Chaco of Paraguay, decades after it had been described from fossil material, under the assumption that the lineage no longer survived among living fauna. These cases do not establish that a tiger population exists in the drainage systems of the Bob Marshall. They establish that when survey coverage is insufficient to encompass available terrain, the absence of confirmed detection is not the same condition as confirmed absence, and that this has been empirically demonstrated, repeatedly, under conditions structurally comparable to the current question. A species that, by every account of its natural history, survives through the systematic avoidance of detection, that maintains territories measured in hundreds of square kilometers, moves only under low-light conditions, selects terrain that erases its passage within hours of its passing, and actively avoids the corridors where human observation is concentrated. If any fraction of the unregistered captive tiger population of the United States had survived long enough, and under conditions adequate to sustain it, in the wilderness interior of northwestern Montana, that is precisely what its presence would look like. Not a confirmed sighting, not a body recovered. A silence, that is, within the current survey architecture of this state, structurally indistinguishable from survival. The Bengal tiger found north of Houston in 2021 was recovered because a neighbor happened to look through a window at the right moment. The record came into existence because the observation intersected, by accident, with a system capable of receiving and acting on it. In the drainage systems of the Upper Flathead watershed and the Rocky Mountain front, in the second-growth timber running along the watercourses that no trail follows, in the creek drainages that close over whatever passes through them the way water closes over a stone, there are no windows. The passage happens. The evidence dissolves. The surface returns to stillness. The question the available evidence cannot resolve is not whether an escaped tiger could survive in Montana's wilderness interior for months or years without generating a formal record. The question, the one that the scale of the territory, the depth of the pre-2022 regulatory gap, and the behavioral ecology of Panthera tigris altaica have together conspired to leave open, is whether, if any have, there is anything in the